The crowd around the arm wrestling table fell silent when Ragna Blackthorne announced her wager, and in that silence she realized she might have made a terrible mistake. "My hand in marriage," she repeated, louder this time, her green fingers drumming on the wooden surface. "To any man who can beat me at this table." The autumn festival swirled around them, full of harvest smells and laughter, but the circle of onlookers had gone still. Ragna kept her expression fierce, her small tusks visible as she grinned with more confidence than she felt. She had meant it as a joke at first, a way to shut down the string of unsuitable men her aunt kept pushing toward her. But the words had left her mouth, and now the whole village of Millbrook Ford had heard. The men in the crowd shuffled their feet and found reasons to look elsewhere. Ragna was strong. Everyone knew it. She worked her family's farm on the eastern edge of the settlement, hauling stone and splitting wood alongside her aging father. Her shoulders were lean and defined beneath her festival clothes, her hands calloused from labor. She was not hulking or massive, just a young woman built by years of honest work, but the combination of her strength and her green skin made the human men nervous. "What is the matter?" Ragna called out, letting scorn edge into her voice. "All of you talk so much about strength and honor, but when it comes to a simple contest, you scatter like rabbits." A few of the younger men bristled at that, but none stepped forward. Ragna felt heat rising in her cheeks. This was humiliating. She had wanted to make a point about the quality of her suitors, not to stand here like a carnival attraction with no takers. Then the crowd parted. Warren Gable walked through without hurry, his eyes on the table rather than on Ragna. He was a tall man, lean and weathered, probably 30 or so years old to her 22. He wore simple clothes, a work shirt with the sleeves rolled down despite the warmth of the afternoon. His brown hair was starting to thin a bit at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into sun and wind. Ragna knew him by sight. Everyone in Millbrook Ford did, but they had never spoken. He kept to himself mostly, lived in a small cottage on the North Road, and did carpentry work and odd jobs for the village. Warren did not say anything as he approached the table. He just looked at Ragna with calm gray eyes, and then he began to roll up his right sleeve. The crowd murmured. Someone laughed nervously. Ragna found herself sitting up straighter, her heart suddenly beating faster. She had not expected anyone to accept, least of all Warren Gable. He was respected in Millbrook Ford, known as a man who kept his word and did good work. He was also known for being quiet, the sort who could go a whole day speaking no more than a dozen words. He sat down across from her and placed his elbow on the table. His forearm was corded with lean muscle, but Ragna noticed the way he positioned it, slightly careful, and the faint network of old scars that ran from his wrist up past where his sleeve now bunched. "You understand the terms?" Ragna asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Warren nodded once. His hand was extended, palm open, waiting for hers. Ragna clasped it. His grip was warm and dry, his fingers long and roughened from his trade. She had expected to feel nothing but the competitive fire that had driven her to make this ridiculous bet. But instead, she found herself acutely aware of the texture of his skin, the steadiness of his gaze. "On 3, called out Marcus Thorne, the blacksmith, who had appointed himself referee. 1, 2, 3. Ragna pushed. She had won every arm wrestling match she had ever entered against farmhands and traders, and even against her own father when she was 17. She knew how to use her leverage, how to keep her wrist locked and drive with her shoulder. She expected Warren's hand to start to give within the first few seconds. It did not. His arm was like iron, utterly still. Ragna pushed harder, putting more of her weight into it, and felt the tiniest bit of give, but then Warren's fingers tightened and the give stopped. His face remained calm, almost blank, but she saw the tendons in his neck standing out, saw the way his jaw was clenched. The crowd was roaring now, excited by the actual contest. Ragna gritted her teeth and drove with everything she had. Her shoulder burned. Her wrist ached. And still Warren's hand did not move. Then she saw the pain in his eyes. It was brief, a flicker quickly hidden, but it was there. His forearm trembled very slightly, and Ragnar realized with a shock that he was hurt. The scars she had noticed, the careful way he had positioned his arm, these were not just marks of old accidents. He was wrestling with an injury, and it was costing him. The thought distracted her for half a heartbeat, and in that moment Warren pushed. Not a lot, but enough to shift the angle, to turn her wrist slightly outward. Ragna panicked and countered too hard, overextending, and suddenly she was losing ground. Her knuckles dipped toward the table. She could hear individual voices in the crowd now, shouting encouragement, shouting bets. She met Warren's eyes and saw something she had not expected, regret, that steadied her. She set her feet, adjusted her angle, and pushed back with a surge that brought their locked hands to vertical again. They held there, trembling, neither giving an inch. Ragna could feel her pulse in her temples, could feel sweat starting to bead on her forehead. Warren's face was pale now, and there was a tightness around his mouth that spoke of serious pain. She could win this. She could feel it. One more push and his arm would give. But the victory would come because he was injured, because he was wrestling through pain that she did not fully understand. And if she won, the bet was void. She would be free of her impulsive wager. But if she lost, she would marry Warren Gable. A week ago, an hour ago even, that thought would have filled her with nothing but dread, a trap of her own making. Now, with her hand clasped in his and his gray eyes meeting hers with something like apology, she found the idea did not horrify her at all. But she could not just throw the match. That would be its own kind of insult. They strained against each other for another long moment, and then Warren spoke for the first time, his voice low enough that only she could hear it under the crowd noise. Let it be a draw. Ragna blinked sweat from her eyes. What? A draw, Warren repeated, his voice rough with effort. We both let go, the bet is void. You go free. That is not how arm wrestling works, Ragna said, but her heart was hammering for reasons that had nothing to do with the physical strain. Make it how it works, Warren said. His arm was shaking now, and she could see white around the edges of his mouth. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They both released at the same moment, and their hands fell apart. Ragna sat back, gasping, her arm hanging numb at her side. Warren cradled his right arm with his left hand, and for a moment the pain on his face was naked and clear. The crowd erupted in confusion. Some people were shouting that Ragna had won, others that Warren had, still others that it was not finished. Marcus Thorne was waving his arms, trying to restore order. Ragna stood up, her legs unsteady. It was a draw, she announced loudly, cutting through the noise. The bet is void. There will be no marriage. She expected to feel relief. Instead, she felt empty. Warren was already standing, already turning away, his right arm still held carefully against his body. He moved through the crowd with his head down, not meeting anyone's eyes. Ragna watched him go and felt something twist in her chest. The festival continued around her, but the joy had gone out of it. People came up to congratulate her, to laugh about the spectacle, to speculate about what would have happened if the match had gone on. Ragna smiled and made the appropriate responses, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept seeing the regret in Warren's eyes, the pain he had been willing to endure for. For what? For her honor. To save her from the consequences of her own foolish pride. She did not even know him. That thought itched at her for the rest of the afternoon and all through the evening. She helped her father pack up the vegetables they had not sold and loaded the cart for the ride home. Warren Blackthorne was a broad-shouldered orc man with more gray than green in his hair these days, and he had watched the whole arm wrestling incident with a carefully neutral expression. "That was quite a scene you made," he said as they drove the cart down the darkening road toward their farm. "I know," Ragna said quietly. "Your aunt will have opinions." "Aunt Helga always has opinions," Doran chuckled. "True enough, but what matters is what you think." "Do you regret making that bet?" Ragna was quiet for a long moment, listening to the creak of the cart wheels and the steady clopping of the horse's hooves. "I regret making it the way I did," she said finally. "Like it was a joke, like my future was something to gamble with." "But do you regret that Warren Gable accepted?" "No," Ragna said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "No, I do not regret that." Her father glanced at her sidelong. "He is a good man, quiet but good. People speak well of him." "What happened to his arm?" Doran was silent for a moment. "There was an accident 3 or 4 years ago. He was working on a mill construction up north, somewhere past the border. A load of timber came loose. He pulled 2 men clear, but the load caught his arm, crushed it badly. They say it healed crooked, and it has pained him ever since." Ragna closed her eyes. "And he still accepted my stupid bet." "He did." "Why would he do that?" Her father shrugged. "You would have to ask him." The problem was that Ragna had no excuse to ask him. They had called the match a draw. The bet was void. She had no reason to seek out Warren Gable, no reason to knock on the door of his cottage and demand answers to questions that were none of her business, except that she could not stop thinking about him. She went through the next few days in a distracted haze. She mucked out the stalls and hauled water and mended fences, and all the while her mind kept circling back to the festival, to the moment when Warren had sat down across from her, to the steadiness of his grip, to the quiet way he had offered her an escape. On the 4th day after the festival, she made a decision. She put on her better clothes, the deep blue dress that her aunt had made for her last year, and walked into Millbrook Ford. It was a fine autumn morning, crisp and clear, and the village was busy with people preparing for winter. Ragna asked 3 different people where Warren Gable's cottage was before someone finally gave her directions. It was a small place on the north edge of the village, with a tidy garden and a workshop shed out back. The cottage itself was well made, the shutters straight and the roof solid. The work of a good carpenter, Ragna thought. She knocked on the door before she could lose her nerve. Warren answered after a moment. He was in his work clothes, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, and there was sawdust in his hair. He looked surprised to see her. "Ragna Blackthorne," he said, and it was strange to hear her name in his voice. "Warren Gable," she replied. "May I come in?" He hesitated for just a moment, then stepped back and opened the door wider. "Of course." The inside of the cottage was as tidy as the outside. The main room served as kitchen, living area, and workspace all at once. There was a table with 2 chairs, a fireplace with an iron pot hanging over low coals, and a workbench against one wall covered with woodworking tools and half-finished projects. Everything was clean and organized, the home of a man who lived alone and took care with his space. "I should have offered at the door," Warren said. "Would you like tea or water?" "Tea would be nice, thank you." He busied himself with the kettle and the fire, and Ragna found herself watching the way he moved. He favored his right arm, she noticed, using his left hand for most of the work. But he was not clumsy or slow. He had adapted to the limitation, found ways around it. "I wanted to thank you," Ragna said abruptly, "for what you did at the festival, for giving me a way out of that bet." Warren did not turn around. "It was a foolish bet, Foolish for you to make, foolish for me to accept. Then why did you accept? He was quiet for a moment, pouring hot water over tea leaves in 2 clay cups. Because no one else was going to, he said finally. And I thought that must be difficult, to make that kind of offer and have it refused. Ragna felt heat rising in her cheeks. So it was pity. No. Warren turned and brought the cups to the table, setting one in front of her. Not pity. Respect, maybe. It took courage to make that bet, even if it was reckless. I thought it deserved an answer. He sat down across from her, in the same position they had been in at the festival, but without the table between them now. Just 2 people sharing tea in a quiet cottage. You hurt yourself for me, Ragna said. Your arm, I could see it. Warren's hand tightened on his cup. It hurts anyway. Most days. But not like that, not like when you were pushing. He met her eyes and she saw acknowledgement there. No, not like that. Why? Ragna asked. You could have just let me win or not accepted at all. Warren took a sip of his tea. Would you have wanted me to just let you win? Ragna opened her mouth to say yes, of course. That would have been the sensible thing. But the words stuck in her throat. Because the truth was that the match, for all its pain and awkwardness, had been real. Warren had given her the respect of trying his hardest, of meeting her strength with his own, and that, she realized, was worth more than an easy escape. No, she said quietly. I would not have wanted that. I thought not. They drank their tea in silence for a moment. Ragna could hear the sounds of the village outside, the distant ring of a hammer on metal, voices calling to each other in the street. It was peaceful in a way that surprised her. Your father said you were working on a mill when the accident happened, Ragna said. Up north. Warren nodded. Past the border in the timber country. It was good work, good pay. His voice was carefully neutral, but Ragna heard the loss underneath it. And you cannot do that kind of work anymore. I can do carpentry, finish work, furniture, repairs, but not heavy construction. Not hauling and lifting and working on scaffolding. He flexed his right hand, and Ragna saw the way the movement was slightly stiff, the fingers not quite closing all the way. The arm is not reliable. I cannot trust it to hold under a load. But you trusted it in that match with me. That was different. The only thing at risk was my pride, and I have less of that than most men. He smiled very slightly, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and less worn. Ragna found herself smiling back. You have plenty of pride. You just hide it better. Maybe. Ragna took a breath. I have a question, and I want an honest answer. Warren waited. If we had not called it a draw, if one of us had won, would you have honored the bet? Warren looked at her for a long moment. Yes, he said, I would have, even though we are strangers. Even though it was a foolish wager made in the heat of the moment, even then. A bet is a promise. Promises matter. Ragna set down her cup. Her heart was beating fast again, the way it had at the festival. Then let me ask you something else. If I had lost, if you had won, would you have been angry? Would you have regretted being tied to someone you did not choose? Warren's gray eyes were steady on hers. I did choose. The moment I sat down at that table, the room seemed very quiet suddenly. Ragna could hear her own breathing, could feel the blood in her veins. Why? She asked, and hated how small her voice sounded. You do not know me. Why would you choose me? Warren stood up and walked to the window, looking out at his small garden. I have lived in Millbrook Ford for 4 years, he said. I came here after the accident, after it became clear I could not do the work I had trained for. I needed a place to start over, somewhere quiet, somewhere I could be useful in a smaller way. He paused. In those 4 years, I have seen you in the village dozens of times. Hauling supplies, selling vegetables, working on your family's cart when it broke down in the middle of the market square. I have seen the way you carry yourself, the way you do not apologize for your strength or your skin. The way you laugh with your father." He turned back to face her. "And I thought, if I was the kind of man who had the courage to approach a woman like that, to tell her I admired her, I would have done it long before a festival bet made it possible." Ragna could not breathe. "You admired me." "I admire you," Warren corrected gently. Present tense. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I made that bet because I was angry. Because my aunt kept pushing men at me, men who looked at me like I was something to be tamed or tolerated. I wanted to prove something, I think. That I would not be forced into anything. And instead you forced yourself into something," Warren said. "Maybe, or maybe the bet was just an excuse." Ragna crossed the small room until she was standing in front of him. "I have been thinking about you for 4 days, about the way you looked at me. About the pain you were willing to endure, about what kind of man does something like that." She took a breath. "And I think I want to know more, not because of the bet, because of you." Warren reached out slowly and took her hand, the same way he had at the festival, but gentler now, without the competition. "Then let us start over. No bets, no wagers, just 2 people who might want to know each other better." Ragna laced her fingers through his. "I would like that." They spent the rest of the morning talking. Warren made more tea, and then simple lunch of bread and cheese, and they sat at his table and traded stories. Ragna told him about growing up on the farm, about her mother who had died when she was young, about her father's slow decline as age and hard work caught up with him. Warren told her about his childhood in a logging town, about learning carpentry from his uncle, about the years of itinerant work that had taken him all over the frontier. "You miss it?" Ragna asked. "The traveling, the big projects?" Warren considered the question. "Sometimes. But there is something to be said for staying in one place, for knowing your neighbors, for building something lasting instead of always moving on to the next job." He looked around his small cottage. "I like having a home." "It is a good home," Ragna said, and it was. It was simple, but it was well made and well kept. It was a place that spoke of care and attention, of a man who valued what he had. As the afternoon wore on, Ragna reluctantly said she needed to get back to the farm. Warren walked her to the door. "May I see you again?" he asked. "I was hoping you would ask," Ragna said. "Tomorrow I could bring lunch. We could walk if you like. There are good trails around here." "I would like that very much." She left with a lightness in her step that had nothing to do with the weather, and everything to do with the quiet man watching her from his doorway. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a pattern. Ragna would come to the village 2 or 3 times a week, and she and Warren would spend time together. Sometimes they walked, following the paths through the woods or along the stream that gave Millbrook Ford its name. Sometimes they sat in his cottage and talked while he worked on his projects. Sometimes they simply enjoyed each other's silence, the comfortable quiet of 2 people who did not need to fill every moment with words. Ragna learned that Warren had a dry sense of humor that emerged slowly, like sun through morning fog. She learned that he loved puzzles and complicated joinery, the kind of carpentry that required patience and precision. She learned that he still did exercises for his arm every morning and evening, trying to maintain what strength and flexibility he could. Warren learned that Ragna had a quick temper that burned hot and fast but never lasted. He learned that she sang while she worked, old Orc songs her mother had taught her, and that she had a gift for growing things, for knowing what plants needed and when. He learned that she worried about her father more than she let on, about what would happen to the farm when he could no longer work it. They learned each other, piece by piece, and somewhere in the learning, friendship became something deeper. It was Warren who acknowledged it first. They were walking along the stream one afternoon in late autumn, the leaves red and gold around them, when he stopped and turned to face her. "Ragna, I need to tell you something." She felt her heartbeat pick up. "All right. I am falling in love with you. I think I have been since the festival, maybe even before. And I know we said we were starting over, no bets, no pressure, but I do not want to hide it anymore." He took her hand. "I love you, and if you do not feel the same, I will understand, but I needed you to know." Ragna looked at him, at his serious gray eyes and his worried expression, and felt something bloom warm and bright in her chest. "You are an idiot," she said. Warren blinked. "What?" "I have been waiting for you to say something for 2 weeks now. I have been dropping hints like a ridiculous schoolgirl, and you have been so carefully respectful that I thought maybe I was imagining things." She stepped closer to him. "I love you too, Warren Gable. I have for a while now." The relief on his face was so profound that she laughed. And then he was laughing too. And then somehow they were kissing, standing in the autumn leaves by the cold stream with the sun filtering through the trees. It was a good kiss, warm and sweet and a little awkward, and absolutely perfect. After that, things changed in the best possible way. They were still careful, still mindful of the prejudices that made their relationship complicated, but they were together. Warren started coming to the farm to help with repairs, work that he could do without straining his bad arm too much. Ragna's father accepted his presence with quiet approval, and even Aunt Helga, who had initially been scandalized by the whole festival incident, grudgingly admitted that Warren seemed like a decent man. But not everyone was so accepting. Ragna first noticed the tension when she was in the village market about a month after that afternoon by the stream. She was buying salt and nails, and the merchant was friendly enough, but she could feel eyes on her. 2 women were whispering behind their hands, looking between Ragna and Warren's cottage at the edge of the square. When Ragna turned toward them, they quickly looked away. She mentioned it to Warren that evening. "People talk," he said carefully. They were sitting in his cottage, Ragna mending a shirt while Warren worked on sanding a chair leg. "They have been talking since the festival. I know they talk, but this felt different, like they were judging." Warren set down his sandpaper. "Some people are uncomfortable with us. A human man and an orc woman. It challenges the way they think things should be. We have not done anything wrong. I know." He reached across the table and took her hand. "And I do not care what they think. But I want you to know that if it becomes difficult, if people make trouble, I am with you. All the way." Ragna squeezed his hand. "I know." The trouble came 2 weeks later in the form of a man named Roland Pierce. Ragna had seen him around the village, a thick-set human in his mid-30s who worked as a teamster. He had a reputation for being loud and opinionated, but she had never paid him much attention. That changed when he cornered Warren outside the mill one afternoon. Ragna had come to meet Warren after his work, and she arrived just in time to hear Roland's raised voice. "It is not natural, that is all I am saying. A human man with an orc. People think it is wrong. They are just too polite to say it to your face." Warren's voice was low and level. "What people think is their business. What I do is mine. It is the village's business when you make a spectacle of it, that whole arm wrestling thing, and now you parade her around like she is your wife." "She will be my wife," Warren said quietly, "if she will have me." Ragna felt her heart jump. They had not talked about marriage, not explicitly, but hearing him say it so calmly, so certainly, made her want to laugh and cry at the same time. Roland made a disgusted sound. "You are throwing your life away. A decent human woman would never have you now." "Good," Warren said, "because I do not want a decent human woman, I want Ragna." Ragna stepped around the corner of the building before she could stop herself. "And Ragna is right here." Roland jumped. Warren just looked at her, and she saw the warmth in his eyes that told her he was glad she had heard. "Miss Blackthorne," Roland said, trying to recover his composure, I meant no offense. Of course you did, Ragna said. You meant to insult both of us. You think I am beneath Warren because I am an orc, and you think he is foolish for caring about me. You think you have the right to tell him how to live his life. I am just speaking the truth. You are speaking your opinion. There is a difference. Ragna moved to stand beside Warren. And your opinion is neither wanted nor needed. Warren and I are together. We are happy. And if that bothers you, I suggest you find something more productive to do with your time. Roland's face flushed red. You have a sharp tongue for someone who is only here because of a bet. I am here because I choose to be, Ragna said. The bet was void. We both walked away. Everything that has happened since has been our decision. Convenient story. Warren stepped forward, and there was something in his stillness that made Roland back up a pace. Roland, we are done here. Go about your business. For a moment, Ragna thought Roland might push it further, but something in Warren's expression made him think better of it. He muttered something under his breath and walked away. Ragna let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. That was unpleasant. Yes. Warren turned to her. Did you mean what you said about choosing to be here? Of course I meant it. Did you mean what you said about me being your wife? Warren took both her hands. I should have asked properly. I should have planned something, made it special. Warren, we just faced down a bigot in front of a mill. Everything about us has been unconventional. Why should this be different? He laughed, and it was a good sound. All right then. Ragna Blackthorne, will you marry me? Not because of a bet, not because of what anyone else thinks, but because I love you and I want to spend my life with you. Ragna felt tears prickling at her eyes. Yes. Yes, of course yes. They kissed there in the shadow of the mill, and if anyone was watching and disapproving, Ragna did not care at all. The engagement changed things. Some people in Millbrook Ford were genuinely happy for them. Marcus Thorne, the blacksmith who had refereed their match, congratulated Warren with a hearty handshake and told Ragna she had found a good man. The baker, a grandmother named Iris Holloway, gave Ragna a loaf of celebration bread and told her that love was rare enough without people trying to strangle it with prejudice. But there were others like Roland, people who made their disapproval clear in small ways. The cold shoulder at the market. The whispered comments. The invitations that did not come. It hurt, but it also made Ragna and Warren more certain of each other. They had chosen this, chosen each other, and they were not going to let other people's small-mindedness drive them apart. They set the wedding for early spring, after the winter, but before the planting season got too intense. It would be a small ceremony, just family and close friends, held at the farm. Doran was pleased with the arrangement, and even Aunt Helga grudgingly started helping with preparations. Winter came hard that year, with snow starting early and piling deep. Warren spent more time at the farm, helping Ragna and Doran with the work that could not wait, even in the cold. He repaired the barn door that had been hanging crooked for years. He built new shelves in the root cellar. He made a carved wooden box for Ragna's mother's jewelry, something beautiful and lasting. Ragna fell more in love with him every day. They were in the barn one afternoon in midwinter, Warren repairing a broken stall gate while Ragna fed the animals, when he stopped suddenly and hissed in pain. Ragna was at his side in an instant. What is it? Your arm. Warren was holding his right wrist, his face pale. It is fine, just the cold, it makes it ache more. You should have said something, you should have let me do this. I can do it. But even as he said it, she could see the tremor in his hand, the way he could not seem to grip the hammer properly. Warren, you do not have to prove anything to me. I know. He set down the hammer with obvious frustration. I know, but I hate this. I hate that I cannot do simple things without my arm giving out. Ragna had never heard him sound bitter before. It startled her, and then it broke her heart a little. Come inside. Let me make you something warm to drink." They went into the house, and Ragna sat him by the fire while she heated water for tea. She could see him flexing his hand, trying to work out the stiffness, his face set in unhappy lines. "Tell me about the accident," she said quietly. "You have mentioned it, but you have never really talked about it." Warren was silent for a long moment. "We were working on a dam and mill complex. It was a big project, good money, good crew. I was in charge of the timber frame for the mill building. We were raising a section of roof beam, a huge piece of oak, when one of the lifting chains broke." He stared into the fire. "It happened fast. The beam swung wild, came down where two of my crew were standing. I grabbed them, pulled them clear, but the beam caught my arm against an upright. Crushed it from wrist to elbow." Ragna sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You saved them." "Yes, but I lost everything else. The use of the arm, the career, the future I thought I would have." He looked at her, and his eyes were tired. "I do not regret saving them. But some days I look at this arm and I hate it for everything it took from me." "It did not take me," Ragna said. "You have me, and you always will. And if your arm never gets better, if you can only do small carpentry for the rest of your life, I will still love you. I know. But I want to be able to take care of you, to help you properly, to not be a burden. You are not a burden." Ragna took his damaged hand gently in both of hers. The scars were rough under her fingers, the muscle beneath uneven where the bone had healed poorly. "You are the man I love. And this arm, these scars, they are part of you. Part of what makes you Warren. I would not change them even if I could." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he pulled her close and held her, his face pressed into her hair. She could feel him shaking very slightly, and she held him back, steady and sure. They stayed like that for a long time, the fire warm beside them and the snow falling softly outside. The winter passed slowly, and as the days began to lengthen and the snow started to melt, preparations for the wedding intensified. Ragna made her own dress, deep green wool with embroidery at the neck and sleeves. Warren built them a bed frame, beautiful and sturdy, with carved headboard that showed oak leaves and acorns intertwined. Doran arranged for a pig to be roasted, and Aunt Helga spent a week making berry pies and honey cakes. But 3 days before the wedding, everything changed. Ragna was out in the field, checking on the early planting, when she heard shouting from the direction of the road. She ran back toward the house and found her father struggling to lift a fallen beam. Part of the barn roof had collapsed, weakened by the weight of winter snow, and the beam had fallen on Doran, pinning his leg. "Father!" Ragna grabbed the beam and heaved, but it was massive green oak, still heavy with moisture, and she could not lift it alone. Doran's face was gray with pain. "Get help," he gasped. "Go to the village. I cannot leave you like this. You have to. I cannot get free without help." Ragna ran. She ran faster than she ever had down the road toward the village, praying that someone would be close, someone would come. She was still a half-mile out when she saw Warren walking toward the farm, a sack of supplies over his shoulder. "Ragna, what is wrong?" She gasped out the explanation, and Warren dropped the supplies and ran with her. They made it back to the farm in minutes that felt like hours. Doran was still pinned, his face now ashen. The beam had shifted slightly, and Ragna could see blood seeping through his trouser leg. Warren assessed the situation quickly. "We need to lift it together. On 3, we lift and you pull him clear. Can you do that?" Ragna nodded, moving into position. Warren gripped the beam with both hands, his right arm included, and Ragna saw his jaw clench. 1, 2, 3, they heaved. The beam rose inch by agonizing inch. Ragna could see Warren's face going white, could see the tremor in his right arm, but he did not let go. He held the beam high while Ragna grabbed her father under the arms and dragged him clear. Got him. Let go. Warren released the beam and it crashed back down, missing Doran by inches. Warren stumbled back, cradling his right arm, his breath coming in harsh gasps. But there was no time to check on him. Doran's leg was badly hurt, bleeding from a deep gash and bent at an ugly angle. Ragna tore strips from her shirt and bound the wound as tightly as she could while Warren ran for the cart and horse. They got Doran into the cart and drove as fast as they dared to the village. The healer, a stern woman named Catherine Frost, took one look at the leg and shook her head. Broken in 2 places, maybe 3. He will be off that leg for months, maybe longer. He may always walk with a limp. Ragna felt the world tilt. But he will live, he will live. But he will not be working that farm anytime soon. Ragna sat with her father while Catherine set the leg and stitched the wound. Doran bore it stoically, but she could see the fear in his eyes. The farm was their livelihood. If he could not work it, what would they do? Warren was waiting outside when she finally emerged. His right arm was wrapped in a wet cloth, and she could see swelling around the wrist. Let Catherine look at that, Ragna said. It is fine. Warren, do not be stubborn. You just lifted half a ton of oak beam with a bad arm. Let her check it. Catherine did check it, and her verdict was not good. You have torn something, maybe several somethings. The arm needs rest, complete rest for at least a month, maybe more. No lifting, no heavy work, nothing that strains it. Warren nodded slowly. I understand. They drove back to the farm in silence. Doran was asleep in the back of the cart, dosed with poppy milk for the pain. Ragna held the reins and tried not to cry. I am sorry, she said finally. You hurt yourself because of us. I hurt myself because that is what you do for people you love, Warren said quietly. I would do it again. But your arm, your work, will still be there when it heals. Your father might not have been if we had not gotten that beam off him. Ragna wiped her eyes. The wedding. We should postpone it. Warren looked at her. Is that what you want? I do not know what I want. I want my father to be all right. I want you to be all right. I want to not feel like the world is falling apart. Then we do not postpone it. We get married in 3 days just like we planned. And then we figure out the rest together. Ragna wanted to argue, but she was too tired and too scared. All right, together. The next 3 days were a blur. Aunt Helga moved into the farm to help care for Doran. Ragna worked from dawn to dusk trying to keep up with the chores, with Warren helping as much as he could with his one good arm. The wedding preparations, which had seemed so important, now felt like an afterthought. But when the morning came, when Ragna put on her green dress and walked out to the yard where they had set up chairs and tables, she felt something in her chest ease. Friends and neighbors had come, more than she expected. Marcus Thorne was there, and Iris Holloway and Catherine Frost. Even some people who had been cold about the engagement had come, perhaps swayed by the dramatic rescue, or perhaps just by the simple fact that 2 people wanted to make a life together. Warren was waiting for her, dressed in his best clothes, his right arm in a sling but his eyes bright with emotion. Doran was there too, sitting in a chair with his splinted leg propped up, beaming at his daughter despite the pain. The ceremony was simple. They spoke their vows in the old way, promising loyalty and love and partnership. There was no priest, no official sanction, just 2 people making promises to each other in front of witnesses who cared about them. When Warren kissed her, Ragna tasted salt and realized she was crying. But they were good tears, happy tears, tears of relief and joy and hope. The celebration afterward was subdued but genuine. People ate roasted pork and berry pie, and Marcus Thorne made a speech about how the best marriages were forged in fire and tested by hardship. Aunt Helga cried into her handkerchief and told Warren that if he ever hurt her niece, she would personally come after him with a rolling pin. As the afternoon wore on and the guests began to leave, Ragna found herself standing with Warren by the barn, looking out over the farm. His good arm was around her shoulders and she leaned into him, grateful for his warmth and his presence. "So," Warren said, "what do we do now?" Ragna thought about her father's injury, about Warren's damaged arm, about the work that needed to be done and the challenges ahead. "I think we figure it out, one day at a time." "I like that plan." They stood together as the sun set, and Ragna felt a kind of peace settle over her. They had been through so much already, and there would be more challenges to come. But they were married now, bound by choice and love and promises freely given. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The first weeks of marriage were harder than either of them had anticipated. Warren moved into the farm, and they turned one of the smaller rooms into a bedroom for Doran, so he would not have to navigate stairs with his injured leg. The work was constant and exhausting. Ragna took over the heavy labor that her father could not do, while Warren handled what he could with one good arm and improvised solutions for the rest. He built a series of pulley systems that allowed him to lift and move things without straining his injured arm. He taught Ragna tricks for making the work easier, better leverage and positioning that saved her strength. And slowly, painfully, his right arm began to heal. The swelling went down. The range of motion increased. Catherine Frost checked it regularly and pronounced herself cautiously optimistic. Doran healed more slowly. The leg knit, but crooked, just as Catherine had warned. He would walk again, but never easily and never without pain. But his spirits remained surprisingly good. He seemed almost relieved in a strange way to have the future decided for him. He could not work the farm anymore, so there was no point in worrying about it. His daughter and son-in-law would take over, and he would help where he could and otherwise enjoy his declining years. "I am too old to be breaking my back in the fields anyway," he told Ragna one evening. "And you are more than capable of running this place. You always have been. I was just too stubborn to admit it." Ragna kissed his forehead. "Rest, father, we have everything under control." It was not entirely true, but it was close enough. She and Warren fell into a rhythm, dividing the work between them, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses. Warren's arm continued to improve, and by midsummer he could use it for most tasks, though heavy lifting still caused pain. But something strange happened as his arm healed. He seemed less careful with it, more willing to push, as if the rescue of Doran had changed something in how he thought about his injury. Ragna noticed it one afternoon when they were repairing fences in the back pasture. Warren was using both hands to hammer posts, the right arm doing its full share of the work even though she could see him wince occasionally. "You should ease up," she said. "Catherine said to be careful." "I am being careful," Warren said. "But I am also not going to spend the rest of my life babying this arm. It works. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not painlessly, but it works. And I would rather use it and have it hurt than protect it and lose what strength I have gained." Ragna set down her own hammer. "Is this about Doran?" "About lifting that beam." Warren drove the post one more time, seating it firmly, then turned to face her. "It is about understanding what the arm is for. I spent 4 years protecting it, trying to heal it, avoiding anything that might hurt it, and in that time it got weaker, stiffer, less useful. But when your father was pinned, I did not think about the pain or the risk. I just used it. And afterward, after the initial injury healed, it was better than it had been before, stronger, more flexible. So you are deliberately putting strain on it." "I am using it the way it was meant to be used. Yes, it hurts sometimes. but it is my arm, part of my body, and I am tired of treating it like a stranger." Ragna understood, even if it worried her. Warren had spent years defined by his injury, by what he could not do. Using the arm fully, accepting the pain as the price of capability, was a kind of reclaiming. A way of becoming whole again, even if that wholeness was different than it had been before the accident. "Just promise me you will not be stupid about it," she said. "If it really hurts, if something feels wrong, you will stop and rest. I promise." They finished the fence together, working side by side in the summer heat, and Ragna thought about how far they had come. From a foolish bet at a festival to this. Married, working the farm together, building a life. It was not the life she had imagined for herself a year ago, but it was good. Better than good. It was theirs. Harvest that year was bountiful. The weather had been kind and the crops came in strong. Ragna and Warren worked dawn to dusk, bringing everything in, and even Doran helped where he could, sorting and bundling from his chair in the barn. When they went to market with the harvest, Ragna noticed that the reception was different than it had been. People were more accepting, more willing to do business with them. Part of it was simply that they were established now, a married couple with a working farm. But part of it, she suspected, was the story of Doran's rescue. Word had spread about how Warren had lifted that beam, injured arm and all, to save his father-in-law. That kind of courage and loyalty meant something, even to people who had been skeptical about the marriage. Roland Pierce was notably absent from the market, and when Ragna asked Marcus Thorne about it, the blacksmith just shrugged. He took a job driving freight to the northern settlements. Good riddance, if you ask me. We do not need his kind of poison around here. That evening, after they had sold most of their harvest and were packing up to head home, Warren nudged Ragna and pointed toward the edge of the market square. The arm wrestling table from the festival was there, being loaded onto a wagon by a couple of men. It was going to be taken to storage for the winter, Ragna assumed, but seeing it gave her an idea. "Warren, we should buy that table." He looked at her quizzically. "Why?" "Because it is part of our story. Because every time I look at it, I will remember the moment you sat down across from me and changed everything." Warren smiled, that rare, full smile that made her heart skip. "All right, let us buy it." They negotiated with the men loading the wagon, and for a few silver coins the table was theirs. They loaded it onto their own cart, and Ragnar ran her hand over the worn wood, feeling the grain and the history. "What should we do with it?" Warren asked as they drove home. Ragnar thought about it. "You are going to make it into something new, something useful. Something that will be part of our home." Warren looked at the table, then at her, and nodded slowly. "I have an idea." It took him 3 weeks, working in the evenings after the day's labor was done. He disassembled the table carefully, salvaging every piece of good wood. Then he rebuilt it, transforming the arm wrestling surface into a kitchen table, sturdy and beautiful, with the old scoring and marks from the festival still visible in the wood. The legs became the base, reinforced and refined. The whole thing was sanded smooth and oiled until it glowed. When he finished, he brought Ragna out to the workshop to see it. She ran her hand over the surface, tracing the faint lines that had been worn into the wood by countless matches, by her own hand and Warren's locked together in contest. "It is perfect." They carried it into the house together and set it up in the kitchen. That night they ate dinner at it for the first time, just the 3 of them, Ragna and Warren and Doran. It was a simple meal, bread and stew and late summer vegetables, but it felt significant. This table had been part of a bet, a contest, a turning point. Now it was the place where they shared meals, where they would plan their days and celebrate their joys and weather their sorrows. It was the foundation of their life together, transformed and made new. As autumn came on again, a full year since the festival, Ragnar realized that she was happy in a way she had never quite been before. Not the wild, giddy happiness of festival days or summer evenings, but something deeper and more lasting. The happiness of waking up next to the person you love. The happiness of shared work and shared goals. The happiness of knowing that you have chosen well and been chosen in return. One evening in late autumn, Warren found her standing at the fence, looking out over their fields. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and the air was crisp with the promise of coming winter. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "About a year ago, about that stupid bet, about how scared I was when you sat down at that table." "Scared? You looked fierce." "I was terrified, because I realized in that moment that I actually cared who won, that it mattered." She leaned against him. "And then I got to know you and I realized I had been an idiot. The bet was never the point, you were the point." Warren wrapped his arms around her, his right arm as steady as his left now, the difference between them barely noticeable. "I think maybe we both needed that bet, to give us permission to be brave. You were plenty brave. So were you." He kissed the top of her head. "And I would sit down at that table with you again, every time, no matter the stakes." Ragna turned in his arms to face him. "What if I told you that by spring we are going to need a cradle? Would you still say that?" Warren went very still. "Are you?" "I am." Catherine confirmed it this morning. For a moment he just stared at her, and then his face broke into a grin so wide and joyful that Ragna started laughing. He picked her up and spun her around, and she clung to him, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," Warren said, setting her down gently. "We are going to have a baby. We are." He knelt down and very carefully, very gently pressed his forehead against her stomach. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I am your father. And I am going to build you a cradle, the best cradle in the whole frontier. And I am going to tell you the story of how I met your mother, and how she was the fiercest, bravest, most wonderful person I had ever seen." Ragna threaded her fingers through his hair, feeling the emotion well up in her chest so powerfully that she could hardly breathe. This was everything. This was the future they had fought for, the life they had built together out of a foolish bet and a moment of courage. Winter came and passed, and Warren did build a cradle, pouring all his skill and love into every joint and curve. Doran carved toys, little wooden animals that could stand on a shelf and wait for small hands to play with them. Aunt Helga knitted blankets and made tiny clothes, muttering about how babies always came at the most inconvenient times but secretly delighted to become a great aunt. And in the early days of spring, as the first flowers pushed up through the melting snow, Ragna went into labor. It was long and hard, but Catherine Frost was there, and Aunt Helga, and Warren refused to leave even when they told him he should wait outside. He held Ragna's hand through every contraction, and when the baby finally came, slippery and squalling and perfect, he was the first to see her. "A girl," Catherine announced. "Small but healthy, good lungs." Ragna held her daughter and felt a love so fierce and overwhelming that it eclipsed everything that had come before. The baby had green skin, small nubs where tusks would eventually grow, and eyes that were still unfocused but already curious. She was beautiful. She was theirs. "What should we call her?" Warren asked, his voice rough with emotion. Ragna looked down at her daughter, this tiny person who was the living proof of everything they had built together. She thought about names, about family and legacy and hope. And she thought about the story she would tell this little girl someday, about how her parents met, about bets and courage and love that grew from the most unlikely beginnings. "Olive," she said. "Her name is Olive, because that was the crop we were bringing to market the day of the festival." The day you sat down at that table and changed everything." Warren smiled and kissed Ragna's forehead, then very gently touched Olive's tiny hand with one finger. The baby grasped it instinctively and he laughed. "Hello, Olive. Welcome to the world. We have been waiting for you." Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and more wonderful than Ragna had imagined. Olive was a good baby, curious and alert, and she grew quickly. By summer she was smiling and reaching for things. By harvest she could sit up on her own. And every day, Ragna and Warren fell more in love with her, and with each other, with this life they had made. Doran doted on his granddaughter, holding her in his lap and telling her stories, teaching her songs in the old Orc language that Ragna's mother had taught him. Aunt Helga visited often, always bringing something useful, a new blanket or a jar of preserves or just her practical presence. The farm prospered. Word had spread that Warren and Ragna were good people to do business with, reliable and honest. They got steady work, sold their crops for fair prices, and slowly built up a cushion against hard times. Warren took on carpentry projects in the village during the slow seasons, and Ragna discovered she had a gift for breeding chickens, developing a line that was hardy and productive. They were not wealthy, but they were secure. They had enough, and they had each other. On the first anniversary of Olive's birth, they had a small celebration at the farm. Just family and a few close friends, but it was joyful. Olive, now walking and babbling and getting into everything, was the center of attention. She had Warren's gray eyes and Ragna's strong will, and she delighted in making people laugh. That evening, after everyone had gone home and Olive was asleep in her cradle, Ragna and Warren sat at their kitchen table, the table that had once been the site of a foolish bet. "I have been thinking," Warren said, running his hand over the wood, "about that day at the festival. About everything that came after. And I am grateful for all of it, even the hard parts, even Roland Pierce and your father's injury and the arm pain and all the rest, because it brought us here, to this." Ragnar reached across the table and took his hand. "I am grateful too. For your courage, for sitting down at this table when no one else would, for seeing me, really seeing me and not being afraid." "I was afraid," Warren admitted, "but not of you. I was afraid of not being good enough, of my arm failing, of disappointing you. You could never disappoint me. You are exactly the man I needed, the man I love." They sat in the quiet for a while, just holding hands across the table, and Ragna thought about the journey they had taken. From strangers to adversaries to friends to lovers to partners to parents, it had not been easy. It had been full of challenges and pain and moments of doubt, but it had been worth it. Every single moment had been worth it. The next few years passed in the way that years do when you are busy and happy. Seasons turned, crops were planted and harvested. Olive grew into a bright, inquisitive child who loved helping in the garden and listening to stories. Warren's arm continued to strengthen, and while it would never be what it was before the accident, it was reliable enough for the work he needed to do. Doran aged gracefully, his leg healing as much as it ever would, content to be the grandfather and storyteller while the younger generation did the heavy work. When Olive was 3, Ragna became pregnant again. This time it was a little easier, her body knowing what to do, and in the spring she gave birth to another daughter. They named her Petra after Ragna's mother, and she was as different from Olive as 2 children could be. Where Olive was bold and energetic, Petra was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and observe the world around her. Warren built a bigger bed frame for the girls to share, with clever storage underneath for toys and clothes. Ragna expanded the chicken operation and started selling eggs to other villages along the frontier. The farm grew and prospered, and so did the family. On a summer evening when Olive was 5 and Petra was 2, the family gathered around the kitchen table for dinner. It was a simple meal, but the table was full of laughter and chatter. Olive was telling a long, complicated story about a frog she had found by the stream. Petra was trying to eat her vegetables but getting more on her face than in her mouth. Doran was interjecting details and corrections into Olive's story, making her giggle. Aunt Helga had stayed for dinner and was making approving noises about the stew. Ragna looked around the table and felt a wave of contentment so powerful, it almost brought tears to her eyes. This was what she had fought for. This was the life that had grown from a moment of reckless pride and a quiet man's courage. Warren caught her eye and smiled, and she knew he was thinking the same thing. After the girls were in bed and Doran had retired to his room, Ragna and Warren walked out to the fence line, as they often did in the evenings. The stars were bright overhead, and the night was full of the sounds of summer, crickets and frogs and the distant call of an owl. "I never asked you," Ragna said quietly, "what you thought in that moment at the festival, before you sat down. What made you do it?" Warren considered the question. "I thought about courage, about what it means. I realized that I had been spending years being careful, protecting myself from pain and failure, and I was tired of it. I was tired of being the man who watched and never acted. So when you made that bet, when no one else would step forward, I decided to be brave. Not because I thought I could win. Just because you deserved someone to be brave for you." Ragna leaned her head on his shoulder. "You changed my life. You changed mine." They stood together in the darkness, and Ragna thought about all the moments that had led them here. The contest, the pain, the doubt, the slow building of trust and love, the challenges they had faced and overcome together. The children sleeping in the house behind them, the farm around them, the community they had built. It was not a perfect life. There were still people in Millbrook Ford who disapproved of their marriage. There were still hard days and setbacks and moments of frustration. Warren's arm still ached in cold weather. Doran's leg still pained him. The farm demanded endless work and worry, but it was their life. Built by their choices, sustained by their love, enriched by the family they had created together. As they walked back to the house, hand in hand, Ragna thought about the arm wrestling table, about how it had been transformed from a site of contest into a place of communion. That transformation, she realized, was a kind of metaphor for everything that had happened. What had started as a battle, a challenge, a test of strength, had become something entirely different, something better. Inside, the house was quiet. Ragna checked on the girls, tucking blankets around them, marveling as she always did at how small and perfect they were. Olive was sprawled across her side of the bed, already dreaming. Petra was curled up tight, her thumb in her mouth. Warren came up behind Ragna and put his arms around her, and they stood together in the doorway, watching their daughter sleep. "We did all right," Warren whispered. "We did," Ragna agreed. They went to their own room, to the bed Warren had built for them, with its carved headboard and solid frame. They lay down together, and Ragna rested her head on Warren's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for rolling up your sleeve, for sitting down at that table, for being brave." "Thank you for being worth it," Warren replied, his hand stroking her hair. They drifted off to sleep like that, wrapped around each other, safe and warm and home. Years continued to pass as they do. Olive and Petra grew, and when Olive was 7 and Petra 4, Ragna found herself pregnant once more. This time it was a boy, and they named him Wilfred, after Warren's grandfather. Wilfred was a calm baby who rarely cried and seemed content just to watch the world with solemn eyes. Warren built a new cradle for him, this one with carvings of trees and animals, a mobile of wooden birds that spun slowly when you touched them. Olive and Petra were enchanted with their baby brother, constantly wanting to hold him and help with his care. Doran lived to see his grandson born, holding the baby in his arms with tears running down his weathered face. "3 grandchildren," he said. "Your mother would be so proud, Ragna, so very proud." He passed away that winter, quietly in his sleep, and the whole family mourned him. But his presence remained in the farm he had built, in the stories he had told, in the legacy of hard work and integrity that he had passed on to his daughter and grandchildren. They buried him on a hill overlooking the farm, with a simple marker that Warren carved: Warren Blackthorne, farmer and father and friend. Ragna stood at the grave with Warren's arm around her and her children clustered close, and she felt the weight of loss and gratitude mixing together. Her father had lived to see her happy, to see her children, to know that the farm would go on. It was enough. Life continued. The children grew and helped with the work. Olive developed her mother's strength and her father's patience. Petra showed an early gift for working with animals, able to calm even the most skittish horse. Wilfred was clever with his hands, always taking things apart and putting them back together, fascinated by how things worked. Warren taught all of them carpentry, showing them how to measure and cut and join, how to respect the wood and the tools. Ragna taught them about growing things, about the seasons and the soil, about the satisfaction of hard work done well. The farm prospered. Warren's reputation as a craftsman spread, and he started taking on more ambitious projects, furniture and decorative work for people across the frontier. Ragna's chicken breeding produced birds that were sought after by farmers from 3 villages over. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were respected. The prejudice that had marked their early days together had largely faded. Oh, there were still occasional comments, still moments of awkwardness, but mostly people saw them as just another family, just another hard-working couple making a life on the frontier. Their children were accepted and liked, friends with both human and orc children in the area. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Warren surprised Ragna by closing up the workshop for the day and taking her on a walk, just the 2 of them. Aunt Helga had agreed to watch the children, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a day to themselves. They walked the trails they had walked when they were courting, following the stream through the woods, talking about everything and nothing. About the children and their different personalities. About plans for expanding the chicken operation. About Warren's idea for a new kind of joint that would make furniture stronger. About whether they should plant more apple trees or focus on the vegetable gardens. Eventually, they found themselves at a clearing overlooking the valley, the same place where Warren had first told Ragna he loved her. They sat on a fallen log, and Warren took her hand. "I have something for you," he said. He pulled out a small wooden box, beautifully made, with inlays of different woods forming a pattern of leaves and vines. Ragna opened it and found inside a pendant on a simple chain. The pendant was carved wood, smooth and warm in the shape of 2 hands clasped together. "It is us," Warren said quietly, "at the table. I carved it from a scrap of the original wood, the piece I did not use when I rebuilt the table." Ragna felt tears welling up. "Warren, it is beautiful." 10 years, he said. 10 years since we made those promises, and I would make them again, every single time. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Ragna, you and our children and this life we have built. I wanted you to have something to remember that. To remember that it all started with a foolish bet and a moment of courage. Ragna put on the pendant, and the wood was warm against her skin. "I do not need a reminder. I think about it every day, every time I sit at that table, every time I watch you with our children." Every time you hold me at night." She took his face in her hands. "You are my home, Warren. You and our family, and I would not change a single moment of how we got here." They kissed there in the clearing, the same way they had 10 years before, and it felt both familiar and new. A decade of shared life, of challenges faced and overcome, of love deepened and tested and proven true. When they walked back to the farm that evening, hand in hand, they found the children had made them a surprise. With Aunt Helga's help, they had set up a celebration dinner outside, with lanterns hung in the trees and the kitchen table moved out into the yard. There were flowers on the table and the good dishes, and Olive had made a cake that was slightly lopsided but clearly made with love. "Happy anniversary!" the children shouted when Ragna and Warren arrived. They ate dinner together as the sun set and the stars came out, and it was perfect. Olive told jokes and made everyone laugh. Petra quietly made sure everyone had enough food. Wilfred asked 100 questions about everything and nothing. Aunt Helga supervised and offered commentary and dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief. After the children were in bed, Warren and Ragna sat at the table, now back in its proper place in the kitchen. The wood glowed in the lamplight, worn smooth by years of use but still strong, still beautiful. "This table has seen a lot," Ragna said, running her hand over the surface. "It has. And it will see more. Our grandchildren sitting here someday. Generations of meals and conversations and life." "Do you ever wish things had been different? That we had met another way?" Warren thought about it. "No, because this way is ours, unique to us. The story of the orc girl who bet her hand in marriage and the quiet man who rolled up his sleeve. It is a good story." "It is," Ragna agreed. "And it is not finished yet." They sat together in the comfortable silence of long partnership, and Ragna thought about the future, about watching their children grow and find their own paths, about growing old with Warren, their hair going gray together, their hands becoming gnarled with age but still finding each other, about grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the farm passing down through generations, about a legacy built on love and courage and the willingness to take risks for what mattered. It had all started with a reckless bet and a moment of quiet bravery, but it had become so much more. It had become a life, rich and full and deeply satisfying. It had become a family, bound by blood and choice and love. It had become a home, a place of safety and growth and belonging. Ragnar reached across the table and took Warren's hand, the same way they had clasped hands that day at the festival, but gentler now, with no contest between them. Just connection, just love. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything." Warren smiled and squeezed her hand. "Always." And in that moment, sitting at the table that had been remade from the site of their first meeting, surrounded by the home they had built and the family they had created, Ragna felt complete. This was happiness. Not the absence of challenges or pain, but the presence of love deep enough to weather anything. The knowledge that she had chosen well and been chosen in return. The certainty that this life, imperfect and difficult and absolutely beautiful, was exactly what she wanted. Outside, the night was full of stars. Inside, the fire burned low in the hearth. And at the kitchen table, two people who had found each other against all odds sat together in peace, their hands clasped, their hearts full, their future stretching out before them bright with promise. The arm wrestling match that had brought them together was long past, but the partnership it had sparked, the love it had kindled, would last the rest of their lives and beyond. And that, Ragna thought as she finally rose from the table and followed Warren to bed, was the best kind of victory there was.